After the Lucy Letby press conference the other day, where we were told an international panel of experts, headed by this fella, Professor Xu Li, had found no evidence of malpractice on her part in any of the cases, I thought I would run through those cases which they mentioned, which are also mentioned in the appeal application judgment as an independent reference for the cases, charges and convictions, which is 4 of the cases in total. The charges, etc., are also mentioned in the sentencing, but I found that's not entirely reliable, so I won't be relying on that only. I'm hoping to do all 4, and this will be about baby A, baby 1. This is from the application for appeal. It was the prosecution case that Lucy Letby, who was standing by baby A's cot at the time of the collapse, murdered baby A by deliberately administering air into his venous system through the line by which he was being given intravenous fluids. This is now radically disputed by the panel, which concluded baby 1 died from thrombosis, which is clotting of the blood causing blockages. There was no evidence of air embolism. The one finds murder on the part of Lucy Letby, the other finds accidental death. Which one is more persuasive? The one thing that stood out from that panel presentation was the matter of skin discoloration, but the extent to which that is actually key to the murder conviction could be debatable. This is how the conviction was restated in that panel summary document. It was alleged that baby 1 died from injection of air into the intravenous line, causing air embolism, resulting in collapse, patchy discoloration of the skin, and death. It was given in the appeal application judgment you just saw as by deliberately administering air into his venous system, and in the sentencing it was given as he died of air embolus as a result of you administering a bolus of air into his venous system which blocked off the blood supply to his heart and lungs. There's no specific mention I can see in those of air leading to skin issues, so I'm not sure that the discoloration is quite as categorically linked in the actual original charge and conviction as the panel restating them here suggests. That's Dr. Lee's restatement of the conviction at the top, which does differ from the original phraseology in including the skin discoloration. It is, however, mentioned a few times in that judgment. One doctor describes it as purple-blue with red and white patches which were all over the body. Another one says the skin was very pale to blue, but there were unusual pink patches, mainly on the torso, which would flit around. It was, he said, very unusual and not something which he had seen before. He had not included this description in the clinical notes, as he had not then appreciated its significance. He had, however, later become aware that his colleagues were describing a rash, and so he had then undertaken a literature review and came across the Lee and Tanswell paper. He said that he remembered reading the description of the skin changes in that paper, which made him feel quite cold and worried. So all of this implies a skin discoloration link with the death, but the main prosecution witness, this Dewi Evans character, wasn't even aware of the skin discoloration when he made his findings. Dr. Evans said that he had prepared a number of reports about baby A, but that he had not known about the reported skin discoloration when he had first made the diagnosis of air embolus, as the witness statements had not been sent to him. So Evans' air injection conclusion was made without any knowledge of the skin issues. He would say, my diagnosis stands, it didn't depend on the skin discoloration because I wasn't aware of it. And that might turn out to be a stumbling block, who knows. But he did make some comments which firm up the relevance of the skin matters. He accepted that the diagnosis of air embolus was a diagnosis of exclusion in the sense that you have excluded other explanations for the collapse. But he said that sometimes there is additional information, either discoloration or the presence of air in an X-ray, and those factors will enable you to firm up your diagnosis. If the witness accounts were reliable, then the pattern of discoloration and flitting movements was what you get in air embolus. So, for one thing, his diagnosis was based on there simply being no other possible causes, which doesn't exactly inspire huge confidence. And he then also starts to integrate the skin business. He says that if the doctors are correct, then that's what you get. And he also says it somehow firms up his diagnosis. All of which does have a slightly opportunistic ring to it. You know, I didn't know anything about it, but now I do. It probably supports my conclusions. And then, quite crucially, we had this reference to the Lee and Tanswell paper, which made the other doctor feel cold and worried. This is said paper written by the Dr. Lee on the panel and one Mr. Tanswell in 1989, where they looked at 53 babies and found 6 of them, or 11%, with cutaneous signs, skin signs in other words, and they describe blanching and migrating areas of cutaneous pallor, paleness of the skin, were noted in several cases, and in one of our own cases we noted bright pink vessels against a generally cyanosed cutaneous background. Bright pink patches against a bluey purple background. This corresponds to what had been reported. It's what one of those doctors said had made him cold and worried, as he put it. I'll come back to him towards the end. But Dr. Lee explained that he went on to do another study last year where he separated out babies who had been injected with air into the veins from babies who had been injected into the arteries. This one here, and that's the 10 babies out of a total of 117 who suffered air embolisms as a result of accidental intravenous injection of air. Intravenous means into the veins only, not the arteries. You learn something new every day. Moving down to those with skin discolorations, there were 2 with non-specific discolorations, which were cyanosis, which is a blue or grey, pallor, which is pale without colour, and mottling, which apparently is red, purple or blue blotches or streaks, but nothing after that. The ones that correspond to the baby in question would be red patches, of which there were none, and also Lee's sign, and that would be a dead giveaway because Lee's sign is pink red blood vessels superimposed on the cyanosed background. That would correspond exactly because it was described as purple-blue, which is cyanosed, with red and white patches, which were all over the body. But of those babies injected with air into the veins, there were none with Lee's sign. So if this baby had discoloration after being injected with air into the veins, it would be the first example ever according to this compendium of cases. So either he was the first example ever recorded in the literature, or he hadn't been injected with air into his veins, or these records are simply wrong. And the reason it never happens is given as when air is injected into the veins, air bubbles must first traverse the lungs, where they are filtered out by a vast bed of small blood vessels. He also goes on to give a generalized explanation of the skin condition. Patchy skin discolorations are caused by dilation and contraction of small blood vessels in the skin in response to hypoxia, that's low oxygen, which can occur in many conditions. If the skin condition actually undermines the air injection conviction rather than supporting it, there has to be an explanation for the baby's death. This is what they suggest. Post-mortem of baby 1 showed a recent non-occluding thrombosis in the liver, which means there was a recent thrombotic event, blood clotting in other words. On the day of the collapse, baby 1 had 2 central catheters that were left without infusion for up to 4 hours, which predisposed to thrombosis when there is no infusion. Shortly after infusion was started, in the most central line, baby 1 collapsed. A thrombosis from the catheter tip likely migrated to an artery supplying the brainstem, causing sudden collapse and inability to resuscitate the infant. So aside from that being an apparently plausible alternative explanation offered by a multi-person expert panel, standing on its own merits also, as opposed to a diagnosis of exclusion, he was left with air embolus as the explanation. You know how that should have been correctly read. He was left with air embolus as the only remaining possible explanation. That's a lot more accurate. Aside from that, it also fits the timeline and it matches other known facts of the matter. The collapse happened just after the line was restarted, which they suggest pushed a clot into the circulation, which they know about because they actually found a clot. So you've got a convincing alternative explanation which stands on its own merits, rather than, well, we've got nothing else so it must be this, and a convincing rejection of part of the original diagnosis on the basis of zero precedent, assuming that all this is correct and it doesn't omit anything. And this is Dr. Lee's summary of all that.
So our conclusion is that baby 1 died from thrombosis and that there was no evidence of air embolism. Because in this baby, the allegation for air embolism was that number 1, the baby died, we could not find a reason for it. Number 2, this baby had this collapse accompanied by these skin discolorations, which was consistent, was what the allegation was, with air embolism. And what we are saying is, first of all, The second reason doesn't hold, because air embolism by the venous system does not produce these kinds of skin discolorations. Number two, there is a plausible and reasonable reason why this happened, which is what I just explained. So for both those reasons, we feel that this diagnosis is wrong, that this is not pulmonary air embolism. In fact, this is because of thrombosis.
Do you remember Dr. Ravi Jayaram, who felt cold and worried when he read about those skin issues in that 1989 paper? Ravi Jayaram has a sense of what you might call the theatrical.
The families and the police have both said to us that they consider you to be a hero. Do you think the enormity of the part you played in all of this has sunk in yet?
That has about as much of a genuine ring to it as any number of Hollywood actresses' manufactured virtuous meltdowns over Donald Trump's deportation policies. If you have to spend this long playing to the camera, you are playing to the camera.
Do you think the enormity of the part you played in all of this has sunk in yet?